It'll be a timed write. It's going to be taking place 8 a.m. We'll set up the timer for you. We'll run it like the timed essays that you guys have been seeing from the College Board this past week, if you've been working with those. And we'll be working you through the process of giving you one last chance before next Friday to get a dry run at what writing under time is going to feel like. So today is meant to be cleaning up any sort of style issues or questions that you guys have, especially when it comes to the writing that was offered yesterday by the College Board. And the writing that they did yesterday was kind of weird because of the fact that they gave a DBQ that looked like this. So let me, excuse me, my allergies are really killing me this week. They gave a DBQ on this page. So let me put this link into your chat first. And the DBQ link is right here. But what was weird about that DBQ that they offered was that they didn't actually put the question onto the DBQ itself. So if I open up the PDF here, this is what we had access to yesterday. And I assumed that they were going to do some sort of update with that. They didn't. And so instead, you had these documents right here, and the documents themselves have some issues going on with them. That makes me suspicious that this DBQ was cobbled together by the presenters themselves, because this is something that looks wise. The College Board isn't a big fan of releasing documents that look like this. And in particular, they don't like that they're missing parts of the criteria that you see happening here. So let me show you a couple things that I am suspicious will not be showing up on the test next week. Number one, if you are looking for the essay question, it actually popped up during the timed writing up here at the top of the question itself in the timed area. To what extent did American society change during the antebellum period 1820 to 1860? That essay question is tricky because of the fact that typically you'll have some sort of categorization or organization that would allow you some direction to figure out what you're doing with the essay question itself. In this case, though, like, in what ways did American society change during the antebellum period 1820 to 1860? Are you talking about North, or are you talking about South, or are you talking about both? Are you talking about white people, African Americans, or both? It is assumed that you're not talking about westward expansion yet, but you could absolutely include that in the question if you are being strictly literal. And so in this case, the strategy that we use of looking at the question first and then analyzing the documents isn't helped out by a question that is this broad. But I would be surprised if next week you get a question that is as broad as this one, because there's a lot of wiggle room that you could use in an essay like this one. And in this case, the documents are very much the guidance that you will need to answer a question on the AP test. So while I'm suspicious that this is not what you're going to be seeing from the College Board next week when it comes to a question, I anticipate that it'll be a little bit more focused or specific about the categorization that you're using. In this case, if they are giving you a question like this next week, it is then up to you to figure out how you're going to frame and organize your essay question when you're writing something like this. If you take a look at the documents themselves, there's another element that is not typical for what you'll see on the AP test, where they do give you Charles Grandison Finney right here, abolitionist preacher from the Second Great Awakening. But they don't give you a date for Andrew Jackson's speech to Congress on Indian removal, which is odd, because that is something that is never missing from a document of this sort. It's same thing with this sort of sourcing that you see right here, leaving off the year for the Declaration of Sentiments. Doesn't make much sense. It gets a little bit more gamey than what you would anticipate. And just announcing this is a Frederick Douglass speech, especially since he was speaking all the way through the 1850s into the 1860s. Without that context, this document is just thrown out to you as an element that you really are going to struggle with And I can't anticipate that this is the way that the DBQ is going to be run then next week. This is something that I've never seen previously, and I don't anticipate you'll see it next week. I anticipate you'll get more information to be able to help you through. What I can help you out with, though, is if you are throwing something like this on the test day that is a curveball, like the speeches that you see right now, and you've got a phone handy and you want to be able to look up whether some sort of supporting details about what's happening right here, that would be permissible. Given the parameters that they have. Copying and pasting is not, and that's something I need to speak to right now. I've got a number of people in class who are, instead of submitting their own work, they're submitting copying and paste sort of stuff. Just like it doesn't work with me, it's definitely not going to work with the College Board. So don't do copy paste. But if you're trying to figure out some sort of way to situate a document like this one, if you're unsure about it, that's something that you are permitted to look up just to get your grounding and figure out where you are. So what we'll be doing today is we're going to be taking a look then at, for preparation tomorrow for your timed write. Let me see. They also included the links to all the documents below. They did do that. But when I went here, they still don't have the sourcing for the documents like they're supposed to. And you can see where they're lifting their source from. If I was building this out for you guys, I would have done more with these to situate them to help you out. This one, though, like you're mentioning, Sophia, they do have at the bottom 1830 is when this was taking place. My hope is that this is not, my hope is that next year and next week, their essay question that they're throwing to you is constructed in the same way that they do with other College Board stuff, that they do have the details that you need in order to be able to be solid. So when I take a look at the essay question that you're being thrown, to what extent did American society change during the antebellum period 1820 to 1860? Today is meant to be an opportunity for me to build out for you, how do you do a good essay? How do you keep yourself safe? How do you earn as many points on this rubric as possible? And that is very much key to what I want to be doing with your writing for the next week. In your other classes, when you are taking English classes and you're writing for other audiences, you should be writing for interest. You should be putting hooks in to try to figure out how to maintain their engagement in your writing. In this case, though, this is strictly formulaic writing. You are writing an essay to try to score the maximum number of points to demonstrate to a college professor or a teacher like me that you can bypass U.S. history in your freshman year of college. You should then have a strategy for how you're going to maximize as many of the points on this rubric as you possibly can. This rubric looks like it got a little bit goofy. I'm not certain what this is doing over here. That's the last thing I need today, is to have my rubric breakdown too. So when I look down this list, the things that I want to be thinking about are these: thesis, statement in the first or the last, preferably both paragraphs, that answers the full question, a contextualization, preferably I'm going to do two of them, one at the beginning, one at the ending, one pre the time period or right as the time period starts, and one post or at the end of the time period as we move into the new, to show the effects or the continuation of the essay forward. I'm going to want to use my documents. And with the documents, I would like to use them to support my writing for the essay, and support, like it says here, it must accurately describe the content, and it must use these documents to support my argument in response to the prompt. In attempting that, I should be able to earn this first point without any problem, because that's going to come from just summarizing the documents. And if I do that twice, I earn that point. We're shooting higher. We want to figure out how do we use these documents to really effectively support answering the full question of the DBQ. Each time we use the documents, we want to be thinking about hip or happy, whichever of the two terms you like to use. We want to be thinking about either the historical context or the intended audience or the point of view or the purpose of the author, not just lifted from the document themselves, but taken as an inference, a feeling. It's an understanding where you can make a claim to the reader that the intended audience is supposed to be this group of people, not mentioned in the document, but you can assume they're the people that are supposed to be the recipients of this information. And you should be able to explain what this document is meant to do to influence or change their mindset or do something for them to help move them in a different direction. When you're doing this, you only need to choose one element of hip or happy, but you'll find oftentimes if you do more than one, it's oftentimes something you'll naturally be doing with analysis anyways. And so if you are using that as a way to set up your document, I regularly will use the historical context plus something else in order to be able to get to the big picture. Audrey, I saw your question. How do we introduce our contextualizations? That's a really good question. So if I was thinking about contextualizing this essay question, and it's asking me about the culture and how the American society and how did it change during the antebellum period from 1820 to 1860, my pre-contextualization is most likely going to describe what American society was at the time of this essay getting started, what characteristics it had that I planned on running out in my essay. And so that's going to be what I'm going to be demonstrating for you today when we get into our brainstorming is once I get that idea that I need to have this and I need to plan it in advance, that's where my writing is going to get better because I can figure out, does that belong at the beginning of the first paragraph followed by my thesis statement? Or do I want to make my thesis statement and then my first paragraph be the contextualization? If I want to announce one can contextualize with, you could do that. Although if you do a contextualization well, you can signal to the reader that you're doing something to set up the rest of your essay that doesn't need to have that explicit titling with it. But if you feel better using titling, you absolutely can. So I'm going to get back to how I build that out with my brainstorming in just a second once I lay out the rest of the rubric. With your rubric here, then, keep in mind that as you are working your way through, these two pieces of information right here are the points that are really going to be essential for you to earn your credit if you're planning on bypassing this class in college. You have the opportunity to introduce two additional pieces of outside information that are not found in the documents and actually use them to support your argument. This is going to be the make or break point because I've found that most of the essays that I've graded struggle to earn these points for two different reasons. Number one, there are some people who are really still struggling with content so much and planning so much that they're writing document-driven essays. Document 1 says this, document 2 says this. And as we highlighted previously, if you're doing document analysis, using all the documents makes sense to try to get the full points for the rubric, but this point right here is going to be tricky to get done. Supporting the argument using all the documents but one well is going to be pretty time consuming. And many kids are doing this to the exclusion of this. If you bring in two outside pieces of information and you use them well to support your essay, now they can't just be a phrase or a reference. This is like a solid chunk of a paragraph or a paragraph itself, highlighting pieces of evidence that you could bring in that are going to be in the gaps that the documents are leaving for you. So I'm going to demonstrate how you get that done today as you're planning out your essays. But this is the thing that many kids miss out on. Now, the other reason why kids miss out on this point is I'll have kids who are super worried about flow and the way that the essay sounds. And what they forget about is on their rubric, we cannot have any double dipping. Double dipping means that if there's a choice to be made on the rubric about what you're up to, we have to choose one or the other category to put your evidence into. We can't use evidence twice to earn 2 points on the rubric. We're looking for each skill to be demonstrated with its own specific evidence that you're providing of work that you're doing. And the reason why I mention this is because when we redesigned the AP curriculum, there were many teachers who looked at this and they're like, hold on, kids only need two outside pieces. Sorry, in reality, it's one additional piece of information in normal DBQs. They're doing two for this rubric to give you a chance to enhance your score. But there were teachers who were like, we only need one outside piece of information, and we had to slow down those people and point out, sure, you're getting an outside piece of information here, but also you're using outside information whenever you're doing happy or hippo. And that's the dilemma that many of you guys have. You'll be writing about a document, and then I'll watch you slip in some outside piece of information, and I'm betting that you think that what you're doing at that moment is this. The problem, though, is when you start slipping in outside information and it's situated near a document, it can be seen as historical contextualization of that document. So you have to think through, what evidence do you have that isn't contained in the documents at all? There's something that you're bringing in completely on your own that is also going to help enhance this essay. And what they're looking for is they're checking to see if a kid can only read documents, summarize their main ideas, and not provide a lick of outside information, and all they do is just read 5 documents and summarize them, then that's not going to be something that should tell us that you should bypass college freshman history. It tells us that you're good at reading, but maybe for memorization of facts, you need to take this class again. Now, Maylee, I see your question, where would be the best place for evidence? I'm going to show you how I craft out my essay. And so when we think through the essay question that you have for this test, first of all, take a look at the question: to what extent did American society change during the antebellum period from 1820 to 1860? As we've done with our activities for the past couple weeks, then, we need to figure out before we start writing what we're going to be focusing on when we're working our way through the essay process itself. So first of all, when you take a look, uh-oh, that marker's dead. And this marker is not super. So the first thing that I'd want you to double back to is keep certain pages of your course and exam description available. So let me Control-C and this guy out to you guys. Remember, with your concept outline, I highlighted a few pages for you that will be helpful on your writing day. And if you look at your essay question, the question is asking you to determine which of these skills you're going to be playing out inside of your essay. Now, these essay questions are built in a way where they might allow you to do multiple historical skills that you can demonstrate for the reader, but there's going to be at least one major skill that's going to be emphasized. To what extent did American society change during the antebellum period, 1820 to 1860? In my mind, if I'm taking a look at the skills, this is definitely not compare-contrast. This could be having elements of causation, but it's not asking you what caused the changes. It's asking you to what extent did America change? And so this is going to be a CCOT. Now, if you remember with CCOTs, if we take a look at the planning that we have here, so I'm going to show you what my brainstorming looks like. If you start off with a CCOT, we learned from the John Irish Style Guide. This is something that can be used when you're working your way through your writing. You've got different types of organizers that you can be using with different types of writing. A CCOT, you can create a T chart like this to think about different categories. And you'll notice with the essay question, it's saying, to what extent did American society change during the antebellum period, 1820 to 1860? This essay question, if you wanted to show complexity, they've got changes and continuities, or you could do it like this, create a timeline, changes and continuities. The thing that's nice about his chart if I build it from this perspective right here, I could easily go like this if I really wanted to create a sophisticated essay. You know what I mean? So if I double back to this screen right here, You'll notice I highlighted for you the fact that they left off categorization. And so in my mind, if I think about North and South, because we're getting into the period of sectionalism during this time period, perhaps playing out in what ways did the North change over this time period? In what ways did the South change over this time period? In what ways did they stay the same? That might lead me to a much better essay response than if I just announced that America is making decisions. Now, with this brainstorming, then, what I would like you to think about is this, and this is where your contextualization is going to come in. Contextualization would be saying that this period right here is within that time frame of 1820 to 1860. When they give you dates like that for your essay question, those dates are meant to be figured out first. So 1820, we learned about in class, is important for the Missouri Compromise. 1860 is the year of Abraham Lincoln's election. Those two moments obviously are the beginning period where we see sectionalism getting bad, and the end point where we finally see it resulting in the Civil War. Now, when it's asking you about this, it's not asking you what caused the Civil War as the main focus of the question. It's asking you to what extent did American society change during this time period. But if you're thinking about the Civil War, it starts in 1861. That could easily be your post-contextualization. Your pre-contextualization could be talking about the things that led up to this moment. But what you should do is, if you're taking a look at continuity and change over time, you should take a moment and answer this question. So in your brainstorming, what you should think about is what was the North and what was the South like during the period before 1820? So if you could, please, I'd like you to help me out. In the chat section, are there things that we could say about the North or the South that would be able to describe what their society was like, what their culture was like at the time that we start this essay? South was definitely agricultural based. Absolutely right, Martin. What about the North? Abolitionist movements in the North, but is that huge during this time period yet? The North was starting to industrialize, absolutely. Although if we take a look, and this is where you guys will have the advantage. You guys remember that when it came to American factories, you've got factories that are getting started in like 1812 with Samuel Slater. You've got factories like the Lowell Mill. But when we start to get to industrialization, that's a trend that happens during this time period. The stage is set, but we haven't really done widespread industrialization yet. You see here, the North had a more diverse economy, true, although that's going to be even more true coming up in the upcoming years following 1820 as we industrialize. Most people in the North are still reliant on farming, so are most people in the South. Northern society underwent much more change societally with the rise of abolitionism, and the South was reluctant to undergo structural change to their regional society. I think, Ty, you're seeing exactly what's going to be happening then when we build this out. But the change is happening largely after 1820. That's the thing that I really want you guys to be precise about, is many of you guys are jumping the gun with your essay where you're starting to get into the actual essay itself. And what I want you to think about is, in order to evaluate continuity and change over time, you've got to accurately be able to describe what is happening in the North, what is happening in the South. And what I could say is, in the period of the 1810s, you've got these elements that are taking place. Most Americans in the United States, North and South, were farmers during that time period. They had not industrialized widespread yet. That process is just getting underway. we do also have a period where our political parties have now short-circuited because we're now moving into the era of good feelings because the Federalist Party is now dead. So politically, you've got one political party, the Democratic Republicans. Federalists have now faded out because of their issues with the War of 1812. You've got a country that is feeling nationalistic in nature because we've just defeated the British for the second time, and we've now got independence to start moving out west. And for many Americans, they're really super excited about the idea of moving into Western territory now that the British have been removed as a threat. And so there's this feeling of unity inside the country that is about to be undermined quite a bit. Now, if we think about the chart that we've got here, then, when we think about the chart itself, the northern changes that you have during this time period, you are going to have the rise of industry. You will have the Second Great Awakening. And so this is how you can use your chart, where you've got in the north some change that is taking place. You've also still got people who are reliant on farming. And so you've got some economic similarities that are going on. But you'll notice that I'm kind of wavering a little bit because of the fact that this essay has not given me a lot of guidance as far as how I'm supposed to be focusing in on the idea of American society. This term, I've got two mouses here, so that's not helping me out a ton. To what extent did American society change during the antebellum period? Here's what I want you to think through next, because this is what's going to help you out with your brainstorming. You've got themes, and I apologize, this is me trying to juggle a bunch of windows and not doing it super well. Inside your concept outline on page 28, and this is the document that I shared with you from the College Board, you need to be figuring out what themes you're going to really be focusing in on. And so in this case, you can feel that we're moving towards the idea of economics. And so when we think about how you've got work exchange and technology right here, you're about to see our society, our culture change a ton as a result of changing economic standards. We're going to go through an industrial revolution, a market revolution, a transportation revolution. We're going to see a diversification of the economy up in the north. And you've also got in the south a maintenance of the cotton gin, cotton plantation system, and that's going to lead to a desire to move out west. This essay question then gets really big really quick, because when you get into American culture, to what extent did American society change during this time period? You've also got the question of American society involved in a westward migration. Are you talking about the Mexican-American War? Are you talking about settlement out west? And then also, our politics are going to be changing quite a bit. Our culture is going to take quite a bit of a change. Social structures are going to be changing quite a bit, which is the reason why the essay question yesterday is one that I'm really nervous about dwelling on too long, because it gets too big too quick. There'll be more of some sort of organization, because this can allow you to go down so many different rabbit holes that in 50 minutes, this is going to be quite an unfair sort of essay question to throw at you. Now, on the other hand, they might throw at you something that broad to give everybody a fair chance to kind of go down the directions that they want to go. And so my foundation kind of got a little bit shaky when I saw this essay question yesterday. But my hope is that you've got enough content to do this. So when you're writing this upcoming week, your essay question may take the direction that it's going to take. Keep your focus on the rubric. Focus on the idea of making a defensible claim, doing a contextualization, and in your thesis statement, lay out your categories. And so when you take a look at this essay question, are you going to be emphasizing how the American society changed economically? You could put that into your thesis statement as a way to categorize. Are you focusing on it politically? Are you focusing on it with the idea of migration? Are you weaving all of that stuff together in their body paragraphs? But it would really benefit us to think through, where are the documents taking you? So once you've had a chance to kind of eyeball and do some brainstorming, you should take a look and see if the documents are steering you in the direction that the authors are trying to get you to. So here are the 5 documents that they had from yesterday, and I'll be able to kind of lay out for you the big picture that you should be noticing here. Charles Grandison Finney, first of all, is a Second Great Awakening preacher who is bridging the divide between the Second Great Awakening and abolitionism. And if you remember the Second Great Awakening, you had people who were being encouraged to seek out reforms in the world that would make the world a much more a holy place in the eyes of God. And it was the idea that if you aren't fixing sin on earth, you are not going to get your reward in heaven. As a result, when you take a look at this document, this is going to have a change that is impacting the people during this time period. Now, if I bring you back to my chart that I've got right here, if I think about what's happening as change during this time period, I've now got something that aligns with my Second Great Awakening. I've got a document that I'll be able to play out for my Second Great Awakening viewpoint, and that's now been taken off the table as outside information. I can't use that as my rubric point right here. So if I go off on a riff about the Second Great Awakening and the impact that it is having during this time period, I'm not going to get this outside evidence point. Let me go back to here. Andrew Jackson's speech to Congress on Indian removal. He is talking about removing Native Americans from the southeastern part of the United States and moving them out to Oklahoma. Now, when you think about this movement, the reason why the Indians are being removed, if you're being charitable to Jackson, he is doing so to remove Indians from the east so that they are not threatened by their neighbors. But also, when they open up this area, they will be able to exploit the gold that has been found in Cherokee territory, but even more so, this land can now be used for cotton production. And so they'll be able to start planting cotton in the former lands that used to be held by the Native Americans. When we think about our chart then, going back to here, if we think about Southern society during this time period, and we think about Native Americans being removed for farmers to be able to move out west, in my mind, the Trail of Tears is showing a continuity from a previous time period where this is the way that we've treated Native Americans ever since the beginnings of our country. And we're continuing that ideology during this time period and continuing the movement because of the creation of the cotton gin that happened in the 1790s. Going back to your documents right here, this is your Declaration of Sentiments, Seneca Falls. And they're being super gamey by leaving off the term Seneca Falls right here. One of the tricks that I use with cheating, though, is I'll take a line from a document, type it into a search engine, and that's how I find a bunch of cheaters in my classes, because that'll turn up where you're getting your stuff from on top of using Turnitin. If on test day they give you a document that isn't cited well enough and you need to check it out, feel free to do it in that sort of way. Just be careful. If you're doing any Google searching, you are running the risk of then possibly getting flagged for cheating if you're copying word for word or too closely from the source that you're going to. So if you need to check something quick to situate yourself, you can, but hopefully you're going to see the documents to be able to infer what's going on with them. In document 3, you've got the Declaration of Sentiments, where women meet in Seneca Falls. And what women are going to be doing at Seneca Falls is they're rewriting the Declaration of Independence, asking for equal rights to be given to them as has been given to men. As we think about what's going on with women then, you'll notice that they've got this document. You can summarize it. You can describe what's going on with it. And this is where you get into that area of then balancing out historical contextualization for a document, happy, or outside information that you could be using. What I'd like to highlight for you is I'd like to remind you of the trends that led you up to this moment. One of the trends that was happening during this time period is we had an industrial revolution going on, an industrial market, transportation revolutions that were being created. So there are some kids who would want to talk about how that in and of itself created the Declaration of Sentiments, but it's going to be a couple steps away. And this is the way that I would think about situating this sort of paragraph. If I was going to talk about Declaration of Sentiments, I would want to talk about those processes that were inspired by Henry Clay and his American system. And as a result, men had their sphere where men were involved in working in the businesses. And you remember women were caught up in what was called the cult of domesticity. Because of the cult of domesticity, women found themselves getting involved in reform movements. And because of that, many women then found themselves wanting to generate more rights for themselves. And in particular, they wanted the right to vote. So what I might do is I might build out an essay where I would have a paragraph dedicated exclusively to the American system plan of Henry Clay, taking a look at how he was trying to inspire factories and canals and railroads. I would build that all out in its own space, period. In the next paragraph, you could talk about its impact as women were then in a system where they were expected to take care of the home in what was known as the cult of domesticity. Many women wanted to figure out ways to get the right to vote to continue to participate in other reform movements. It's in that sort of strategy that you're going to be maximizing then your scoring on this rubric. You have to figure out how you're going to demonstrate these pieces of evidence in isolation. So you're not going to have like a plate that has like gravy and corn on the same plate. We don't want stuff bleeding into each other because of the fact then that you're going to be forcing the reader to choose one or the other spot on the rubric rather than seeing them as distinctly different from one another. So pick your shots with where you're putting your evidence, and then please make sure that you're planning out the rubrics so you're maximizing the points that you could be earning. The final two documents you have right here, it says here that you have a massive increase in voter participation that is happening during this time period. And it is happening as a result of the increased political tensions that we're having after the era of good feelings. Remember in 1824, this was the corrupt bargain of 1824, where Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams worked with one another to help John Quincy Adams become president, and Andrew Jackson felt like he was slighted. From this point forward, we're going to have Democrats and Whigs who don't like each other very much, but they're not Northern and Southern parties yet. There's going to be Northern and Southern Democrats, Northern and Southern Whigs, but they get very excited about their politics because of the fact that they have got sides that they like, especially for the Democrats, they love Andrew Jackson. And in the case of the Whigs, they do not like Andrew Jackson all that much. Now, how you use this document to then get into the question of to what extent did American society change during this time period? This is introducing a whole different vein into the essay that could be its own essay in and of itself next Friday. This could be talking to you about how politically we changed as a culture. And this is inviting you into talking about the rise of the Democrats, rise of the Whigs. You could get into the rise of the Liberty Party, eventually the Republicans. This document being slipped in here was really tricky, just like this document was. It seems kind of out of place. So it seems like the people who created this DBQ are trying to merge abolitionism with Jacksonian democracy. Because with document 5, you see us go back to abolitionism again. And what you see is your Frederick Douglass speech, which I showed you during the time period of December. We watched James Earl Jones perform this speech where in the 1850s, he is going to be asked to speak at a 4th of July celebration as an abolitionist. And he is going to argue that the 4th of July has nothing in it for him. Now, when we take a look at this document and document 3 and document 1 all have similarities with one another. The temptation that you're going to have on the AP test is to group them. to write paragraphs where it says like documents 1, 3, and 5 all highlight how abolitionism is growing inside the United States, please do not do that. Give each document its own time, because the moment that you say document 1 and 3 say, I have to make the decision on this rubric, did you actually use the content of these documents? And in particular, if you blend them, I can't double dip. I can't say that your document 1 and 5, I go check, check, because you lumped them all together. Analyze them individually. And then if you want to put them in the same paragraph where you summarize by pointing out the trends that are taking place, make sure that with each document, you use each document to support your argument. Make sure you use hip or happy with each of the documents, explaining why the element of hip or happy is important to the question itself. And then if you do that and you want to blend them, you will be in good shape. So let's think about how I'm going to be constructing out this essay question then. It appears to be steering me towards the idea of abolitionism, and in this case, Jacksonian democracy. I can set up those two categories in addition to what I've done with North and South if I would like to build out that type of essay. And in particular, what you'll notice is if I double back to here, you'll notice on my chart, there are things that they have not touched at all on my chart when it comes to outside information. They have not touched the Industrial Revolution or the Henry Clay American system. They've mentioned to you the Second Great Awakening and highlighting Seneca Falls and Frederick Douglass. They have not mentioned anything about the American Anti-Slavery Society, the American Colonization Society, any of Uncle Tom's Cabin, or any of those sorts of things. They've left you a slew of outside information that you could be using in addition to where the documents are taking you. So use the documents to help you scaffold your essay, but then be looking for gaps in the documents that you can then be using to provide outside information for yourself to round out your essay itself. I see two comments. Let me see here. Sophia, did the Panic of 1837 have to do with large voter turnout in the election of 1840? So if we go back to these documents right here, what you're having in these elections, so this is Jackson, this is Jackson, this is Van Buren, and you're right, with Van Buren, you had a backlash in 1840 towards Van Buren because of the fact that we had this panic taking place. We also had this rising tension that was going on politically as we were starting to take a look at the Western frontier, in particular because of the fact that with Texas, they had had their revolution at this point, and the question was swirling, what are we going to be doing with Texas from this point forward? That's where you start getting into the battle of William Henry Harrison and John Tyler. Polk will come in 1844. And so you've got a number of different sectional divide issues that are drawing people into the election process. Perry, would using only 4 documents be a good idea to save time? Here's the caution that I have for you, and I'm going to put it this way because of the fact that when you look at the rubric like this, you may be forced to make choices. My hope is, though, that doing the timed writes this past week that the College Board has been offering, and in particular doing your DBQ tomorrow, my hope is that you're able to find out how you're doing with your time. In a 45-minute window, are you able to plan your essay, write your essay, and maximize this rubric? If you're finding yourself short on time, the points that I find to be non-negotiable because they're so easy to get, thesis and contextualization should be done at the very beginning of your essay. And my hope is that as a grader, I'm able to go check, check with those 2 points to get you a 2 before you're too deep into your essay. I would also argue that when it comes to your essay, if you're planning your essay the way that I just showed you, figuring out your brainstorming, figuring out your organizational technique, look at the documents that are out there and then figure out what openings have been left to you. My hope is that you're able to do these two pretty easily now as well. You're hopefully able to see two outside, let me see here, go up a little bit. You're able to see two outside pieces of evidence that you could use that you're going to be sliding into your essay in a paragraph form without any document attached to them, but be able to do an aside to say, by the way, not connected to any of the documents, you can see how this should also be used to understand how our society changed and how this could be used to describe how our society changed. And that should be super easy to be able to slip in if your content knowledge is strong enough to be able to pull that out. What you're left with then is, after you get done with outside information and thesis and contextualization, is you're left with your documents and complexity. And that's where your planning process comes in. My belief is that your DBQ is going to be built on Friday next week the same way that they've built them in the past, where you're going to have some documents that aren't going to be the easiest for you to use. Like document 4 is not an easy one to figure out how to use well inside of your essay. And so the reason why, and if you notice that there was hesitation that I had when I was trying to figure out how to craft my answer to this, when kids ask me, should I just do 4? You really have to be confident then that you're getting the 4 right, and you're guaranteeing your shot that you're going to earn this point. All things being equal, if you have enough time to do it, I would encourage you to use all 5 of the documents, because it gives you that safety net of one document where if you think you got it, but a reader says, you know what, with that document, you didn't actually support the argument, you just kind of summarized it. If you've been banking on that one to be the one that would earn that point for you, and a reader gets a little bit too nitpicky, you're done with that point. So if you've got enough time, I would use all 5 of the documents as well as you can, in the hopes that even if one doesn't match up, the other 4 are going to do the job for you. And what you don't need to worry about is if you're making some sort of error interpretation with the document, the worst that it's going to be doing is just wash itself out of the system, and we still use what you've got with the rubric itself. Now, if you're finding that you've got time problems and you're trying to figure out, do I focus on this point right here or outside evidence right here, doing the outside evidence paragraphs will serve you well, because you could earn 2 points for this, which would be about the same amount of writing as writing the paragraphs for the 3rd and 4th document to get you from here to here. So ideally, it would be best if you could put all of this stuff into your essay. And that's why, number 1, over the next week, your content knowledge is key. How do you get your content knowledge strong enough that you don't need to go Google searching or whatever? If you take a look at this essay question, you may need to double back to your concept outlines. But keep in mind that if you're able to identify, your essay question says here, 1820 to 1860, analyze how American society changed. Remember that you've got this resource that I showed you inside your concept outline. So if I scan down here, you've got your course at a glance. This is on pages 31 and 32 of your concept outline. This essay is periods 4 and 5. If you start in 1820, this is politics and regional interests, America on the world stage, market revolution, Jackson, development of the American culture, Second Great Awakening. You can look down this chart and you'll notice that you've got like outside information that you could easily just lift from this document. Like you could drop into your essay a compromise of 1850. You see a huge gap in your documents that doesn't touch that at all. And you could easily highlight how this helped to create sectional tension that changed American society quite a bit, because in 1820, we could compromise. This compromise goes so badly. If you need to, then you can go from here and you could see like, oh, this is on 5.4. You could scan down into your yellow concept packets, like the one that I'm holding right now, and you could find the notes that you've taken inside of there. So my feeling is that if you have a system set up to look for content you should be able to look back in your materials pretty quickly and find a couple of pieces of outside evidence that you could play out on top of doing a contextualization and thesis. And then it becomes, how do you work your documents in some sort of organizational system? At this point, then, do you guys have any questions about what you're doing with your DBQs? Because from my perspective, like looking at the one that we had yesterday, it wasn't ideal. The documents that they gave you have certain problems that I'm really not thrilled with. But the thing that I want you to think about is, even if you get a question that's technically bad, your goal is not to worry about writing the question thoroughly and completely to cover every fact and detail that's ever been given. Your job is just to check stuff off of your rubric. And if you maintain that mentality of, here's where I'm doing contextualization, here is where I'm doing my document analysis, try to be thorough, because if you make an argument that stops and it doesn't actually answer the full question, that's going to be something where you're not going to look good. But in this case, like if they give you such a broad essay question that it could go down like 8 different rabbit holes, you can define for the reader how you kind of view how that question should be constructed. And then it's on you to demonstrate each of the historical thinking skills. It's kind of like American Ninja Warrior, where you have to go through this obstacle course and do it to their standards. That's what you really should be thinking through with your brainstorming. This is going to be my outside information. This is going to be my document analysis, including what I'm doing with Happy with these documents. This is how I'm going to craft things out organizationally. And the difficulty, and this is what you'll see if you watch the review that's online today, the 2 people who are running the timed essays this past week point out there's so many different ways you can construct these essays. It's less about the right way to do it, and it's more, do you understand the skill that you're being asked to demonstrate? Do you demonstrate it beyond the minimum that's required to earn the point for that category? And do you create an essay that actually answers the full question as you define it in your thesis? That's what keeps you safe. So let me take a look here. I see a question just popped up. Melee, so we can put outside evidence in its own paragraph after a document analysis. Also, could we put some in our thesis? Great questions. So here are the golden rules when it comes to DBQ. Number 1, do not put any documents in your introduction or your conclusion, and that includes your contextualization paragraph. If you put any documents in there, you take whatever you were trying to achieve and you turn it into the H in happy for that document. So you don't put your documents into the first or the last paragraph. You don't put it into your contextualization, because then it takes your contextualization and that becomes the H in happy, and then your document analysis comes from there. So be careful where you're putting your documents. When it comes to outside evidence, you absolutely can put outside evidence in its own paragraph. What I'm gonna kind of tweak is this point right here. If you're using outside evidence, make sure it's something distinctly different than what the document is. So like in that document that I was showing you about Seneca Falls, if you start going off on a riff about cult of domesticity, you're going to have to situate it and write it in such a way to make sure that it's not seen as the H in happy for the Seneca Falls document. You need to craft it in such a way that it shows that it's outside evidence. And it would be even much better to save the cult of domesticity as like the H for the Seneca Falls document, and use something like the American system or the Compromise of 1850, something distinctly not seen as drawn from the document as your outside information, so that the reader is certain that they know what you're up to with that. When it says, could we put some in our thesis? Same problem with double dipping. So what I would put into your thesis statement is I would put the broad categories of what you're going to be doing with your essay. And if that means that you are highlighting facts that you're going to be getting into, like if you cite in your thesis the American system and then you play it out deeper in a body paragraph in your essay, that's great. If, though, in your thesis statement, that's where you put your outside evidence and the analysis of it, that blurring of the lines becomes tricky. So try to have areas of your essay that are specifically designated for where you're making your attempt at a skill, and you'll be in a much better place. Audrey, if we don't have much time left, how important is it that we do a conclusion? When we think about the conclusion, it's going to be helpful for these reasons. Number one, I regularly see people's thesis statements get better as they summarize and wrap up their essay. So having a final paragraph that restates your thesis statement has really been helpful. And I would say about 25% of the essays that I've read from your classmates, that's the moment where their thesis statement actually earns their point. The one at the beginning doesn't, because it's a little too fluffy or disorganized, but at the end it does come together. That's a really nice place to have that happen. The second thing that I want to highlight for you, though, and this is a really good question to have to bring you to this final concluding point. Notice your complexity point down here. There are multiple different ways that you can earn your complexity point. In this case, this essay question is geared to earning points in a number of different ways. This is a CCOT. So if you're able to explain not just the continuities or the changes, but you're able to do both inside your essay, that's one way you can earn complexity. If you're able to also highlight that complexity in your thesis with like an argument, counter argument, or if you're able to take a look at multiple variables, like when I decided to go with a northern and southern focus to acknowledge that there's sectionalism going on, that could earn me complexity. But it's this point right here that I really like to highlight for you when it comes to the end of your essay. If you do contextualization like you're supposed to at the beginning of your essay, either start your introductory paragraph with a contextualization and then move into a clearly defined thesis, or you start your essay with a thesis statement and then paragraph 2 is your contextualization, your pre-contextualization, where in my case, with this essay, my pre-contextualization could be when we entered the year 1820, America had successfully defeated the British in the War of 1812. They entered the era of good feelings, where one political party, the Democratic Republicans, were the only major party left after the disintegration of the Federalist Party. A wave of nationalism had swept over the country, which gave Americans confidence that they were moving into a new era of peace and prosperity. And the Missouri Compromise demonstrated that by having a balance between free and slave states that peacefully was able to resolve westward expansion by keeping a balance in the Senate between those two, blah, blah, blah. That could be my pre-contextualization. What I then do as a reader is when I see you do that, I check off contextualization here on your rubric, and I stop looking for it. Now, each time you submit outside information in your essay, I then am looking in a couple different places. I'm not looking here because this is just evidence that you're drawing from the documents and you're using them analytically. The places I'll be using them is I could look, so the next time you do a contextualization, that may satisfy your outside evidence piece if it is a piece of information from the time period itself that is relevant to the question. When you use outside information, it might also satisfy happy right here for the documents that you're using. But one of the things I want to highlight for you is what I've got highlighted down here can be your post-contextualization. So let's say you wrap up your essay, you restate your thesis, you've got a few minutes left over, and at the end of the essay, you point out that this essay question is stopping too early. To what extent did American society change during the antebellum period in 1820 to 1860? If I decided to slip into there, the divisions that we experienced because of sectionalism developed during this time period, if that was my emphasis throughout the essay, still reverberated through the Civil War and Reconstruction, where a divide between the industrialized North and the agrarian South continued into 4 bloody years of civil war, originally fought for Union, but eventually fought to free slaves, and brought us into a Reconstruction era where attempts were made to come up with a united solution of what civil rights would look like, but was undermined by Southern resistance and determination to hold on to their old systems of doing things. You could, at that point, be then earning your complexity point. Now, what you're doing at that point is you're trying to do a post-contextualization. So what you're doing is exactly what this is asking you to think about right here, relating the topic of your prompt to broader historical events, developments, or processes that have happened before, during, or continue after the time frame in question. But since we've already checked off this point on the rubric, you then are eligible to earn this point down here if you do it really well. Now it says here that this cannot just be a phrase or a reference, so we need to play this out with multiple sentences to tie everything together, and with you analytically bringing it full circle and explaining to the reader why this has a link to this question. But that's why I point out the conclusion to you is it's got different areas that as a reader, we can really put a good amount of additional impact onto your rubric. Now, if you are running out of time, I would encourage you to make sure you've got a strategy for maximizing the rest of the points right here. And I also want to emphasize for you that even without a conclusion, there are ways that you could have already earned this complexity point by perhaps doing this, showing continuity and change over time, or by taking a look at how this question applies to the North and the South. And so it really depends on how you are doing this essay question, because in this case, this essay question also opens up, this is fair game. Since they didn't give you a really strong category, you may be playing this out politically and economically and socially. The dilemma is that essay question was like 150 pages in your textbook, and they're asking you to do it in a 45-minute window. So Audrey, you're asking precisely the right question. If you can't get to your conclusion, you can't get to your conclusion. For all of us then, the key thing that we're thinking about over this upcoming week is this. Number one, let me turn off the presenting. Your content knowledge is huge. If your content knowledge has weak areas, like if I was running through stuff and you started getting that look on your face where it's like, oh my goodness, terror, I'm not ready for this. You've got a week to get ready, but we got to get your content knowledge stronger so that you're able to introduce evidence like I showed you, and do it automatically, because anytime you're spending searching for information during this writing is time that you're losing from the writing process itself. And they've asked you to pack in a lot in a little amount of time. Secondarily, you should be thinking about how do you craft essays working with the rubric? How do you maximize the rubric to your best advantage? And again, they've got the timed writes that are available on the AP site on YouTube. If you've not done them yet, you should. In about an hour, they're going to be doing a run through of their perspective, what they see going on with the DBQs, and they'll break down historical context, audience, point of view, purpose, and how you do all of that stuff with the documents on top of what we just did. We'll try it out tomorrow. So by early next week, I'll be able to get you a graded DBQ back to tell you under time constraints, how are you doing compared to what the College Board is looking for? So we'll be able to have a week to be able to put the pieces together. And then at that point, we'll have next week where we'll take time to debrief your DBQ. We'll play some review games. We'll start getting your content tight. And we'll be able to work our way through all the way up until your 1 p.m. Essay next Friday. At this point then, the only other thing I need to mention is, like I said, tomorrow, 8 a.m., timed essay, come ready to get started right at 8 a.m. so we can get going as soon as we can. It is timed, so I'm going to give you a time limit to submit through Turnitin. And Turnitin will flag stuff that's copied and pasted from the internet. So try out your techniques. If you find yourself needing, if you need any sort of content to Google search or look up or whatever, I'm going to be using a plagiarism checker like the College Board will, and we'll be able to see if you get flagged. And so try your best not to. And if you do, I'll be able to highlight for you what's going on with that. But I'm looking for stuff in your own words. Let me see here. Tomorrow then, after we get done with your essay writing, if you've got specific questions, I'm betting you will, you and I can do conferences over this upcoming week to help out. And I've got a couple of you who have already sent me emails about checking over stuff with your essays. I'll be getting to that during the afternoon, evening. Today, I'm expected to clean out my classroom because they're closing up the school completely May 11th, and they want us out of there and done. So I got to do my cleaning this afternoon, but then afterwards, I'll be looking over your DBQs. Noah, your question says, will we be meeting the Friday of the AP test? Typically in the past on AP test day, we haven't been able to meet because the test itself starts at 8. Your test is at 1. And so what I'm going to be offering at that time is an open session to be able to ask questions that you need to do last minute review. We can play review games and that sort of stuff to cover any sort of last minute things, because if we've got the time and the decks are cleared of everything else, we should be able to do some preparation on that day to help build up your confidence. But if there are any things that you guys also need from me, the sessions this upcoming week are very much in your hands. We've covered all the content we need to be safe on the AP test. We have now reviewed the construction of the DBQ itself, so I'm feeling very confident that you're at least aware of what the rubric is looking for. But if there's anything you need me doing for you guys this upcoming week, let me know so I can help get you into the best place possible. At this point, you can drop out unless there's questions or comments that you guys need to make before you leave. Enjoy your day. It's looking beautiful outside, but let me know if you need anything else. Have a great day.